This is the Porsche 911, and it is without doubt the most famous sports car in the world. But is it the best? In this review, I'll obviously be finding out what it's like to drive, but also how practical it is, what the infotainment system is like, which version is best, and how many of the bewildering number of optional extras we think it's worth paying extra for. So stay watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the What a Car channel for lots more new car reviews, reveals, and road trips. Now, until very recently, our favourite sports car was the smaller Cayman GTS because it was lighter than the 911. It had a fabulous 4-litre naturally aspirated flat-six engine in the middle of the car here, so it was technically better balanced. And unlike GT4 versions of the Cayman, which were brilliant as well, you didn't have to have a special relationship with your Porsche dealer to buy a GTS. But very sadly, the Cayman and the drop-top Boxster as well are no longer on sale. So the 911 is currently the only proper sports car in Porsche's lineup. And yes, it does cost more than the Cayman, but it is still way cheaper than an Aston Martin Vantage, for example, let alone proper full-on supercars like the Ferrari 296. If you want to spend as little as possible on your 911, you'll want the Carrera, although it still costs more than £100,000, so it's not exactly a bargain. It has a 389 brake horsepower, 3-litre turbocharged flat-six engine at the rear of the car here, that drives the rear wheels through a 7-speed PDK automatic gearbox. This is the Carrera T though, it's the next step up, and it has exactly the same engine as the Carrera, but instead of an automatic gearbox, it has a 6-speed manual instead, which is quite a rarity these days. If you want to spend more, there's the Carrera S and 4S, the latter has 4-wheel drive, the even more powerful hybrid GTS versions, and then there's the range-topping Turbo S, which has more than 700 brake horsepower and can hit 62 miles an hour from a standstill in just 2.5 seconds. That's on top of the GT3 and GT3 RS versions, although as brilliant as they are, Porsche probably won't let you buy one unless you've been a very good customer for a number of years. Anyway, of the versions you should be able to buy, if you have the cash of course, we reckon this Carrera T is the pick because as well as that manual gearbox, and I'll tell you more about why that's so good later on, it also gets a few other choice options over the regular Carrera, including adaptive suspension that sits the car 10mm closer to the road and has been specifically tuned for the Carrera T. Rear axle steering for better agility at low speeds and improved stability when you're driving quickly. Carrera S alloys that measure 21 inches at the back and 20 inches at the front. Lightweight glass, less sound deadening inside, and although there have been Carrera T versions of previous 911s, this is the first time you've been able to have one as a cabriolet. Now, you don't get rear seats as standard, but we think you may as well add them. Not because you're going to use them very often, as you can see, they are absolutely tiny, but they could be useful in emergencies and you don't have to pay extra for them. All you do is tick an option box. And whether or not you decide to have rear seats, this space back here is useful for throwing bags and jackets, and although you can't access it from the rear of the car because the 911 doesn't have a proper tailgate, you can just poke things through from the front seat area. And that isn't the only place to put your luggage, because remember, the 911 has its engine at the back. So, under the bonnet here, there is a huge well that makes the front boots of most electric cars look rather underwhelming. In fact, we managed to fit 3 carry-on suitcases in here, just about, which is the same number we fitted in a Toyota Aygo Cross. So, for a sports car, this is actually very practical. Now, in the front here, the main giveaway that you're in a T rather than a regular Carrera is this thing here, a manual gear lever with a walnut knob. Because otherwise, the interior is identical, although this particular car does have some optional extras, including these carbon-backed bucket seats. They cost about £4,500, so aren't cheap, and also the Bose sound system. It sounds pretty decent, and it is way cheaper than the Burmester upgrade that's also available. Anyway, the 911's interior is pretty smart for a sports car. It certainly feels better made and better finished inside here than it does in a Mercedes-AMG GT or an Aston Martin Vantage. But it's perhaps not quite as premium, quite as upmarket as in previous generations of the 911, or certainly an Audi R8, not that you can buy an R8 anymore, because there are some hard plastics in certain places, and also this gloss black finish on the center console doesn't look especially premium. But as I say, it certainly feels solid And although it's very grey in here as standard, you can pay extra to have some brighter trim inserts if you want a slightly less conservative vibe. So that's a nice touch. One thing that's tough to fault is the driving position, because you sit nice and low down in the car. There's loads of adjustment in the steering wheel. You can set that up just how you want it. And these optional bucket seats are fantastically supportive. They hold you in place really well when you're going around corners, and they are pretty comfortable. The only thing is though, you do sit quite upright. So if you plan to take your 911 on lots of long journeys, or you plan to tour the continent, or you just want to drive it every day, then it might be worth thinking about the standard 4-way adjustable sports seats, or paying a little bit extra, but a lot less than you would on these buckets for the optional 8-way adjustable seats, because then you will be able to adjust the angle of the backrest. Another thing that's good is the view out, because in some sports cars, including the AMG GT, visibility isn't great. And that means that when you're squeezing through a narrow gap, or perhaps maneuvering in a tight car park, it can require a lot of concentration. But here, as I say, the view out is very good. So it's easy to judge the extremities of the car. Also, the 911 feels quite small, so driving in town is a surprisingly relaxing experience. Now, whichever 911 you go for, you get this 12.7-inch digital display behind the steering wheel here. There are no analog instrument dials, and you also get a 10.7-inch touchscreen infotainment system. This system is fairly easy to get to grips with. The resolution of the screen is good. The only slight complaint is that there is sometimes a bit of a delay between pressing an icon and anything actually happening. You don't, though, have to use that screen to adjust the air conditioning, because thankfully there are some proper physical controls for that job down here. Now, okay, they are hidden behind the gear lever a bit, but I'd certainly rather have these proper knobs than having to mess around with icons on the touchscreen. You get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring as standard. You also get a wireless phone charging pad. And you might be thinking, well, yes, I jolly well would expect those things given the price of the car. But remember, this is Porsche, and you have to pay extra for front parking sensors and a surround view camera. Storage space is pretty good. The door bins here are quite small, but there are 2 on either side of the car. There is also a cup holder in the middle here. It's not that big, but it's just about big enough for a small flask. And if you need to carry something big, you can actually take it out completely. Although I wouldn't recommend putting a hot drink there and going around corners quickly. And if you're thinking, well, that's very nice, but where is my passenger going to put their hot drink? Well, Porsche has thought of that. And if you press this little section of the dashboard here, then another cup holder pops out, which is perfect for a small cup of coffee. Now, let me explain a slight problem I have with a lot of modern sports cars and supercars, and that's that they're just too fast. And that might seem like a ridiculous thing to say, because surely ballistic acceleration is all part of the fun. And if you're on a fast racing circuit, or perhaps on a disused runway, then it absolutely is, because you can use that acceleration properly rather than just for a second or two. Take the Ferrari 296 or even faster versions of the 911. They are incredibly capable cars, but if you accelerate hard, put your foot down on the way out of a corner, you'll be in license losing territory almost immediately. Whereas in this Carrera T, acceleration is, I would say, far more appropriate for a road-going sports car. And that means you can put your foot down and enjoy the sound and the feeling of the revs rise before you change gear. So it doesn't matter that ultimately this would lose in a drag race against a dual motor Tesla Model 3, for example. And this engine really does sound great, better than in other 992.2 versions of the 911 I've driven previously. Whether that's because the T has less sound deadening inside, or whether it's because Porsche's engineers have been quietly fettling with the exhaust in the background, I'm really not sure. But despite the fact this is turbocharged, and that can sometimes spoil the acoustics, this sounds really sweet. But another great joy is this gearbox. It's a 6-speeder and it's a delight to use. It isn't the lightest of throws, and neither is the clutch for that matter, but it is wonderfully precise. And you can also make the car blip the accelerator to match the revs on downshifts, although because the accelerator is so well calibrated, it's actually easy and more enjoyable to do that yourself. The same goes for the steering. It's beautifully weighted and gives you a good sense of connection with the front wheels. And I'll tell you what, you can carry an awful lot of speed through corners in this Carrera T just because of how much grip there is. The adaptive suspension gives you the option of switching between normal and sport mode. And if you leave it in the former, on an undulating country road like this, there is quite a lot of vertical movement. So you probably want to tie things down a bit by switching to sport mode. But normal is useful in town, for example, or on the motorway, because it allows the car to iron out smaller imperfections in the road and give you slightly better ride comfort. So overall, the 911 has a bit of a split personality. It's great fun to drive, but it's also pretty easygoing when you want it to be. The only thing I would say is that, like other versions of the 911, there is quite a lot of tyre noise, and that can get a bit weary on long motorway journeys. So, as I've said already, we reckon this Carrera T is the pick of the regular 911 lineup and a fantastic all-round sports car, particularly if you like changing gear yourself. But which options should you add? Well, unless you want black or white, you will have to pay extra for paint. This is Cartagena yellow. If you like it, it costs £1,700. We'd also add the rear seats, as I mentioned earlier, plus the front parking sensor and surround view camera pack, and the optional Bose system sound upgrade. If you do all that, you will be spending around £119,000, which is a lot of money. But in today's world of high-end sports cars and supercars, I actually think it's pretty good value for money. Thanks for watching this review. If you want to watch another one, click up there. And for our full detailed written review on the Porsche 911, click there.